All right, good evening. This is a wonderful crowd, and I want to welcome everybody here tonight to the first public meeting of Bridging Gowanus. I'm New York City Council member Brad Lander, and we're joined tonight in convening this meeting by Congresswoman Nydia Velazquez, State Senator Velmanette Montgomery, and State Assembly member Joan Millman, and we have some other conveners as well, City Council member Stephen Levin, and we're really excited to be kicking off this process. We've obviously got an awful lot of interest and enthusiasm from people that are here, so it's wonderful to have such a big crowd and turn out even bigger than we anticipated. What we believe, the elected officials and some of our other partners, many of whom are at your tables tonight, is that this is an important moment to kick off a broad community conversation to set the ground for the future of the area around the Gowanus Canal. And we think this is an important moment for a few reasons. First, how many of you have taken part in the process around the Superfund cleanup, either through the CAG or at one of the big public meetings that called for the Superfund designation or that have been there? All right, so that looks like about half the room, which is great. And I think we all want to start by saying a big thank you. I mean, I want to start by saying the biggest thank you to our Congresswoman, who's the one who in so many ways, let's hear it for Congresswoman Velazquez. The process, so for those of you who don't know, I won't go through the whole history, but the cleanup of the canal under the federal Superfund program is now really firmly moving forward. It's going to take a while more, years more, but thanks to the record of decision that the EPA has reached, we can see the plan for the cleanup of the canal in a way that many people in this room have been working for many years, but I think you couldn't be sure was really going to be moving forward, but for the work people did to get it designated, to move that process forward, to push it when it was in jeopardy, to keep pushing when they closed the government down, and to move it forward toward cleanup. So that's one big reason why it's going to take a lot of vigilance and a long time is on its way. So that's reason number one. Reason number two, about a year ago, many of us saw what happens in a flood, in a hurricane, in a climate event. And many people, of course, see the flooding that happens on some of the streets and areas around the Gowanus on a much more regular basis. And we know that there is a real need to attend to issues of climate protection, to issues of infrastructure, to issues of flooding, if we want the area to be an area that is safe and sustainable for years to come. So that's reason number two. And reason number three is we've got a change in the administration coming at City Hall. And I think a lot of people who feared that we might not be able to have the community drive a process for thinking about the planning, thinking about the infrastructure, thinking about the land uses around the canal. This is a moment when it's important for the community to make its voice heard. So for all those reasons, the elected officials and a lot of partners thought this is a moment when we should bring people together and try to set the table for a shared vision for the future of Gowanus. So we got a smaller group than this together to start thinking about how to do that over the summer. If you were at that meeting that we had here over the summer, just go ahead and raise your hands. There were about 40 people, and there's a smattering of them throughout the room, just to figure out how do we have this conversation with so many people. And you'll hear a little more from Pratt about some work that they did. We asked the Pratt Center to do some work with us so that we could have a process that involved a real listening and an opportunity for people to talk about their hopes, their concerns, their fears, their thoughts about what would be necessary. So we're going to go through that tonight. There's going to be a presentation. You're going to hear a little bit about that and have an opportunity to talk in your groups. But what I would say before we really get started and I introduce the other elected officials is the following. First, I believe, and I think others in the room believe, there are a lot of shared values around what people care about, love about, are concerned about, would love to see about for the Gowanus. And we'll go through and talk about what those are. And there's a lot to build on together. We know that there are also some real areas of difference where people have different points of view and really need to have the opportunity to talk about that, where people are afraid of things they've heard from other people. There are plenty of people, and I know people who are afraid of this process and think that even just getting people in a room to talk about it represents a set of goals or a secret plan or something people really don't agree with, or that somebody's already bankrolled large development along the canal. There's areas of shared values, there's real areas of disagreement, but we believe we would do better if we can bring people together to talk honestly about them and really have good, honest dialogue about it, rather than trying to pretend it away or sort of brush it under the table. And third, that we are smarter to try to do it together. That not coming together to try to see how much consensus we could build, to try to put a plan together that's thoughtful about infrastructure, that's thoughtful about land use regulations, that's thoughtful both about shared values and areas of disagreement. If we just leave it be, we will probably come out worse. Because one at a time, site owners and developers will bring plans or figure out what they can do as of right, or make proposals for variances, or make proposals for individual rezonings that are much less likely to reflect shared vision, that are much less likely to think comprehensively about infrastructure, that are much less likely to put the community at the table out in front to try to have an opportunity for that to happen, for the community to come together to make some consensus and to put vision in place for planning before other things happen. So those are the ideas that brought us to this room. You'll have an opportunity to agree or disagree with them in your small groups in a little bit, but I just want to be straightforward at the beginning about what our hopes are, what I know some fears are, and about why we thought it really made sense to bring people together in conversation. I continue to believe that the hopes people have for this area around this canal, this industrially polluted, low-lying, frequently flooding area, can be turned into, is already becoming, and we can help it, a real vision of sustainability that can build on what's best about what's already there, build on what's best about our neighborhoods, and help set a real tone for what sustainability can look like in the 21st century. So that's the hope, and now it's on all of us to try to see whether we can do it. So let me first introduce my colleagues in government, and then we'll turn it over to Pratt. Let me first ask Congresswoman Velazquez to come up and say a few words. And again, let's give her a big thank you for all that she's done to make this possible.
Thank you, Brad, and good evening to everyone. I am very impressed and very grateful that you are all here. I want to thank my colleagues in government and everyone, all the community groups, for the role that you played throughout the Superfund process. And I can say without a doubt that the Superfund was inclusive. It opens, put in place a mechanism that allowed for everyone to be at the table, and at the end, we got a cleanup strategy that is the best one that we can have, despite the fact that we were under so much pressure to not take the route that we took together, collectively. We got phone calls that, designating, allowing for the Gowanus Canal to be designated a Superfund, that it will create this awful image that people will leave, that no one will come into the Gowanus area, and it didn't happen that way. Today, the Gowanus Canal is a place where we have a thriving community, where families aspire to have their children, to provide access to the Gowanus Canal, public access, and for a place that really respects what makes the Gowanus community a unique community. Mixed use, light manufacturing, residents, tenants, businesses, artists, and we need to respect that. So, we have a new administration that is coming in place, that is going to be taking office soon, and we welcome Bill de Blasio, but I think it's important for this new administration to get a message, a strong message of what this community wants, and that it must be respected. And I will say that if you look at the experience with the Brooklyn Bridge Park, it was a long, painful process. People who disagreed, we come together, we define shared values, a common vision, and we move forward. We didn't get everything that everyone wanted, but we don't have, and we will not have along the Brooklyn Bridge Park, luxury condos throughout that waterfront. We will have entire communities and families coming and accessing the waterfront, bringing their children, and it's just so rewarding to go biking or walking and seeing the amount of people that are there, entire families. So that is what we want. I will say to you that whatever we put in place here must be driven by this community. It cannot be driven by developers only. And I don't think that that is what you want, but you gotta be at the table, because there is the properties along the way, Gowanus Canal is privately owned. What are we going to allow? Is there gonna be a piecemeal approach by property owners going into the city and applying for a zoning change? And at the end, the entire community will lose. So I respect everyone here, the community, and I must say that you are the reason why we are here, that we must respect your dreams and aspirations regarding the Gowanus Canal. But I also respect the elected officials that are here. And I want to believe that no one has a hidden agenda. I want to believe that we are honest when we want to say that all we want is a process that is inclusive, that is open, and that at the end of the day, we have a planning process that is going to produce what the community wants and not what an exclusive group of people want. So be at the table, let's have a discussion about what is it that you want, from physical infrastructure to social infrastructure. Do we need more school? Do we need more cultural institution? Do we have to make sure that there is flood protection, given the fact that we experienced what we experienced after Sandy? So those kind of experiences we didn't have before. Now we do. What are we going to do about it? And so I welcome all of you, your participation, and at the end of the day, I hope that we're going to produce something that we all could be proud of, and that is a vibrant Gowanus community that welcome everyone, that have the physical infrastructure that is important for this community. Thank you.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Senator. We're going to get to the presentation in just a minute.
Good evening to everyone. I really am so excited to hear this presentation. I want to thank you very much, Councilman, for your leadership to get us all here. And I'm just thinking, I'm remembering two people who, in my mind, represent the best that our community has in terms of people who really, I believe, had a dream so many years ago. Jean DeLazio, I don't know if there's anyone here who remembers Jean DeLazio, who worked so hard, and she had such a dream for what would happen on the Gowanus and really connecting it with the rest of the waterfront. And also, I must say, my really, really good friend who has been, I don't see him somehow, who is Buddy. Where's Buddy?
Buddy's here.
Where's Buddy? Buddy Scotto. Where is Buddy? Buddy, that's my hero. That's Mr. Gowanus. So thank you, Buddy, and thanks to Jim. There he is. He's so quiet. He doesn't hear his name being called. And that's what I recall as it relates to what people think about the Gowanus. So now is the time to honor their dream, and I'm very happy to be working with you to be part of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. This is, as everyone knows, I think needs no introduction, Assemblywoman Joan Millman.
Thank you so much. I know you came here to see this presentation and to have time to work at your individual table. So let me make 3 quick points. one of the things that happened after Sandy, which was a revelation to me, is people who live in Gowanus houses were flooded, and they didn't have heat or electricity. They had nothing for more than 2 weeks. All right, and we never expected. And where did the flooding come from? From the canal. That's where it came from. I never would have anticipated that. They weren't the only people, but they were impacted most directly. Now, for years and years, we've had flooding on 4th Avenue, which is not connected to the canal, but that's another infrastructure thing that we've got to all look at. We have photos in my office, show cars, people being rescued by firefighters, being taken out of their cars because they were submerged in water. So that didn't do anybody any good, and we haven't addressed that problem either. I think that the mayor-elect knows this community fairly well, and I remember the Congresswoman telling me that as a result of the EPA asking for comments, that this was the one area in the entire country, that had hundreds of responses. No other community flooded their email account with as many responses as you guys, all right? So I think the incoming city administration knows the strength and the power of this community. Now, I see some of you are here from Park Slope. I see Carroll Gardens residents, Gowanus residents. There are people from all over who have a real interest in this, because as was said earlier, if we don't have a proactive plan, they're gonna pick, but where else can they develop in the downtown Brooklyn area but here? So if we don't have a real good, solid plan, which we may not all 100% agree on, but that's why we're here tonight, to figure out what we do share, what we need to work on, and where we have to work harder to get closer to some kind of consensus. But if we don't come up with something, I have to tell you, they will pick it apart and do what they want. And we can't have that. We've seen that in other developments. And I'll talk about 4th Avenue. We got nothing for the community. Each plot went to a different developer, and each house got developed, and there are no new schools, there are no new nothing for the community. In fact, even the first floor of all of those residential buildings is like dead space. There's no outside space, there's no community life at all. We can't have that here in the Gowanus area. This is a vibrant community, and as our Congresswoman said before, there has to be a place in this development for everybody, whether it's light manufacturing, whether it's artists, whether it's singles, seniors, families, low income, middle income, whatever we can do to provide a space for everyone, that's what we need to do. And I'm going to be here to listen to the rest of you. And again, I want to thank our councilman for leading this effort. Thank you, Brett.
Thanks very much. We're going to get to the heart of the meeting now. I thought it was worth making sure that you see that all the elected officials are really working together in a very open spirit. We asked the Pratt Center for Community Development, who many of you know have a 40-year track record in doing community planning, to sit down with a diverse set of people ahead of time to try to start building some sense of where people are. So they're going to make a presentation that kicks us off and that brings to your table some sense of what are some shared values that they heard, what are some areas of disagreement that will serve as a prompt for conversation at the tables, and talk a little about how we see this whole process, which is going to move forward in the months to come.
Can you please explain the tables thing to us? Because
so
I'm
why don't you
confused.
just, let me turn it over to Pratt, and they're going to walk forward through the process, and I think by the time you're charged at your tables to talk, hopefully you'll understand. If it's not clear then we'll take a few questions before we break down into the small groups. So with that, let me turn it over to the Pratt Center for Community Development and to Elena Conti.
Thanks, Brad. Hi, thrilled to be here. I'm going to try to make this as brief as possible, but a quick process question for what we're doing the rest of this evening. There's this presentation, then we are going to break up into small groups. We understand not everybody has a table. We are going to do our best to make more groupings so that everyone can participate. That will be discussion about the shared values. Then we'll come back together, and folks that still have time will participate in a breakout. Folks that have to go can go. We're thrilled that there are so many people here, and you can be sure that we will plan even better next time to make sure that everybody is properly accommodated, you plus all your neighbors who we wanted to join us. So, thank you. Well, no more for questions now. Let me hit the presentation, and then we'll try to address stuff as we go. All right, yes, that's the presentation. Right, so as Brett mentioned, we've been talking in small groups, and this is our night to test to see what we heard has any basis in what you think as the general public. So again, next slide, Simon. It's just to make very transparent what we're doing. We have these 7 values on the wall that you're going to discuss. We want to explain where they came from. That's what I'm intending to do in this presentation. We want to show where there's areas of consensus, and we also want to highlight where we have heard that not everybody is on the same page and be very clear about that, and to see if we've got it right. And we want to get a lot of feedback. So next. The first main thing that we heard was related to resiliency and coastal disaster issues. As we heard already, the need to address these issues is clearer than ever in the post-Sandy reality. Environmental infrastructure is insufficient, the recovery infrastructure is insufficient, and even on a regular day, infrastructure is insufficient to handle rain events and flooding. This is what we heard. Roles are not clear. We have some quotes in here that we think are illustrative. So one thing that we heard was worse for us, besides the lack of help from government on any level, was that the cleanup was on us. Everything from the canal, all the toxins, we had to clean up ourselves. We lost everything. This is what a manufacturer said to us. This was their sentiment. They're not alone in it. Resiliency permeates all of these issues. So we have it up in front and center. We're going to go through some more. Let's keep going, Simon. Okay, so all of that was what we heard, consensus across the board. We need to be permanently protected. We did hear some concern about how that gets done. Feasibility and skepticism was raised. Sorry, I'm sorry. Better? Okay. So a concern that something like a flood barrier is a tremendous investment and it's a huge burden to implement. It's an example of one type of divergence. Next slide. Moving on to environmental infrastructure, which is of course related, right? So what did we hear in consensus? Well, folks have the same goals. We don't want it to flood on a normal day. We want to feel protected in the event of a storm, and we want to make sure that combined sewer overflows don't further go into the canal, making pollution worse. Next. The approaches also had a lot of consensus. So everyone agreed we don't have sufficient infrastructure, and our top priority must be to obtain sufficient infrastructure to accommodate all the existing uses and new things that may happen in the neighborhood over time. We also heard broadly an interest in multiple strategies in an integrated, holistic way to dealing with stormwater, all kinds of ideas, bioswales, streetscaping, green roofs, tankless urinals, lots of different stuff. We also heard that the crux of solving the infrastructure problem comes down to good information, okay? We have to build on all the good work that was done in the Superfund process, all the great research that was done there, and where there are gaps or disagreements, we've got to fill them in to do this right. Next. So, I didn't explain divergence earlier because I jumped right in, and I want to explain what we mean by divergence. So divergence is something that we heard very clearly and very strongly as a point that was raised, but that it was not raised universally, broadly in consensus. So it's flagged here because we feel like this is very important for our overall pathway forward, but it can't be said to be held by the whole group, but we want to raise it up here. So a very important concern that we heard is that doing things site by site, right? Protecting and elevating some sites along the canal in order to make them stormwater managed and ready can put other sites in harm's way. This was a clear concern. And there were a few ways that there were solutions around how this might be addressed or how it might be tackled. The first was that an additional hydrology study that looks better at runoff and CSOs and how potential land changes in topography and protecting parcels could be undertaken to get a clearer picture of what is happening in the area and what could potentially happen under future scenarios. Another suggestion about this concern was that it's better to simply not build, that we know how water is moving now, or we have a better picture than before, but there were voices that expressed essentially this, that the new initiatives will be insufficient. The best approach is to preserve the existing condition and not build gigantic things that will affect runoff, causing pushback off the edges. That was out there, so keep going. All right, that's environmental resiliency. Moving along. Community, social, and cultural infrastructure. So we need a lot of stuff in this area across 4 main categories. Recreational, open, and accessible green space. School seats availability, especially primary school seats. Transit access, especially for the most vulnerable, least mobile. And communications infrastructure, broadband, fiber optics, was a major theme that came out of not only the manufacturing community, but also the residential communities. We're gonna go a little bit deeper into recreational, open space, accessible space, because it was deeply felt. So within this category, here's a few things that had consensus, that the existing facilities are so few and the need is so great that the ones that are there have special value, and everything that should be done to preserve their function, to preserve their actual existing form, if possible. And at the top of that list, we heard about the Double D pool and how critical it is to the community, especially because it is free and accessible and allows people to participate in a way that other types of more privatized recreational spaces do not. That's the beauty of the DD pool. It's a public, no expense, and a valuable community resource. It's well loved and used and may be threatened. 2 other big ideas. Just more trees, more places for children to play, and the canal as an open, accessible body of water was desired across the board. So next slide. Let's dig a little bit deeper, though, into what that means, as the canal is an open, accessible body of water. Because while there was consensus around that broad idea, in the practicalities of it, a lot of questions arose, some with differing viewpoints that I'm kind of labeling here complicating questions or challenges. So, what are these? How do we accomplish creating this open, accessible body of water while balancing different valued qualities? So, one valued quality is about the privacy and the intimacy of the water when you're near it. Now, if you can get there, what it feels like and what your experience is, right? And in particular, the arts community mentioned that it allows for creative activities without getting in trouble or needing a permit for it, this kind of little bit more secretive space, right? It lends to this populist feel of how people may relate to the canal. We also heard that the canal is a working waterway and there's active industry, and some people have a vision that that should be preserved and perhaps expanded, right? And we also heard and know that the canal is an important destination for recreational boating now, and that certain types of improvements would be necessary to enhance and extend those uses. So you can start to see how those are all great ideas, but they may not all work perfectly together, which makes them complicating questions. Continuing with that, there's the feeling of the water. Again, this is a little bit the intimacy point, but it's a little bit deeper. And there's different perspectives on how you might approach preserving the feeling of the water. Some folks had it as keeping low density directly around the waterfront, right? Quoting, preserving the ability to see the sky and to see human scale where communities can thrive. That was one approach. A different approach was through design and view corridors. So acknowledging the presence of the water is magical, we must design to have the buildings not spoil the water. Again, same goal, different approach. Let's keep going. Okay, how are we doing? The next big idea about what is really special about Gowanus, that what makes Gowanus Gowanus is its diversity, both in terms of the people here as well as the uses here. This was like at the top of the list of what everyone said, And at the same time, everyone expressed anxiety that is in fact threatened, that going along the path we're on now will not guarantee that this beautiful mix we have will stay. So, people, I don't have to belabor it too much, but from immigrants here generations ago to newer immigrants, to those who speak English less than well, to public housing residents, to artists, to young professionals, right? Every one of those groups actually got its own shout out as we care about these people in our community. And there was also the point that even though we're glad all these people are here, we also recognize that not everybody is as well integrated as we would like to see. Uses are also diverse. Manufacturing, commercial, arts, residential. There's a million quotes that describe how great that is. We could be here all night. There is a general phrase that was used a lot. How can we preserve the grittiness of non-brownstone Brooklyn and keep that be a part of Gowanus? Keep going. So we mentioned that it's threatened. It's threatened through diminishing affordability as the primary thing that everyone said, again on consensus. Diminishing affordability across all different kinds of spaces: manufacturing, housing, retail, and artists. Again, here's the fear. What I fear the most is gentrification, where there's nothing affordable about it. And that's what happens in New York. Artists move in, then get squeezed out. This planning process, this person felt, is an opportunity to not do that. Keep going. So, quickly, on manufacturing spaces, there are a lot of reasons why manufacturing space is becoming less and less affordable in New York City. But the primary reason that it was pointed to in this area is, quote, increasing residential uses and speculation that assumes a residential rezoning are decreasing the availability of affordable space for manufacturing and business expansion. That's what folks said. On retail and artist spaces, a couple key points rose up. And again, this is all in the consensus bucket, right? So, what kind of retail do we want? Something that serves the local population. People found the notion of combining it with light manufacturing uses in the area very exciting. And an acknowledgement that there is some very high-end retail in the neighborhood nearby on Smith and Court, and we don't necessarily need to replicate that here in Gowanus. Different price points are necessary. And for artist spaces, they're facing the same land pressure values that, let's say, all the other types of spaces are facing. But the difference, perhaps, is that we have even fewer targeted strategies that are sector-specific for dealing with that particular topic. And here's a big one. All right, we did the other three types of spaces. Now let's talk housing. So, what are people concerned about? Housing, especially for families, seniors, working and middle-class people. A concern that in the loss of the affordability of housing, there's also a loss in the ethnic, racial, and economic diversity of the community. And there was a strong desire to preserve the existing affordable housing stock, which can be found in a couple of places. It is, of course, found in the public housing in the neighborhood. It's also found in the number of regulated units that now exist in private buildings. And home ownership opportunities, while there may not be a lot right now that is affordable, many people recognize that they had an opportunity to get into this neighborhood because at one point that was a pathway, and folks would like to see that. There was also the acknowledgement that for the creation of new affordable housing, density is an essential factor that must go along with it. So I just thought this was an interesting quote. Not the only one that could be there, but it's so interesting how traditionally middle-class people tend to identify up. And one example is that we are reluctant to face the reality that the current housing market is pricing out so many of us and has changed the sort of support we need to buy a house or a condo or to even rent. So, that was all consensus. There is also consensus around this broad point that, yes, we want these mixed uses, but if we are to actually keep them stably there or make them stable in whatever mix it is that we want, there's a lot of careful planning that needs to be done to achieve it. It doesn't just happen. And so people had different ideas, though, about the things that are necessary to do that smart planning.
One very important idea that came up is that new development has been proposed in what some consider to be a very risky area from an environmental health perspective. This concern is heightened by the back and forth between EPA and the city around toxins in the canal. And the illustrative quote was, how can we say that businesses and people can come in before health? A real desire to get a clearer picture. So one important thought was that a health study that would consider the safety of existing residents and workers in the area, as well as that as potential new residents and workers, could be conducted. Again, this was a diverging view, but one that was clearly stated and deeply felt. Okay, again, we got to plan well. So that also comes with a lot of complicating questions and challenges. One aspect of that is that although we want different uses, we know that different uses can threaten each other, right? So they can threaten each other because the way that one land use affects a land use next door. They change the land value, which changes what people, might want to do with the property next door. Very directly, they may be competing for the exact same space in the neighborhood. That's a way that they threaten each other. And they may threaten each other just because they're not so compatible right next door. So on the one hand, we heard from manufacturers that space to unload and access their vehicles to their properties is very tight. They don't have the footprint on site. They have to use the street. They're attempting to do so. They have no other option, and this is their line of work. On the other hand, we hear from some folks that feel like pedestrian life is deeply inhibited by the fact that there are truck operations happening right on a street that they want to walk up and down. So there's not always that compatibility. There's also sort of a different notion, and we don't have a real clear sense, I would say, yet from these interviews, how deep this runs, but some people expressed a desire for some kinds of industry, but not the other. So light industry, moms and pops, furniture places, got a stamp of approval, while some folks were less approving of some of the more heavy industrial uses, concrete plants. But some folks felt like those are essential uses to the workings of the city. They are here, they are functioning, there's not a lot of places for them to go, and that they have a right and a place to be here. So no matter what you think the balance should be, even if we had it perfectly, there's also the acknowledgement that striking a balance between guiding and controlling the market is often easier said than done, even with the best intentions. So, okay, moving along. Well planned. I think this is a duplicate slide. Fantastic. Next one. Apologies. So, education, employment, opportunities. Quickly, right? Jobs are a big part of whether you can afford housing. You need to have a job that pays you, right? And you need to be able to get a job that's going to advance you regardless of what your current skill level is. So the connections between residents and economic opportunities need to be strengthened. You need to have some actual economic growth for there to be new jobs for people to get into. And currently there is a fair amount of residential segregation where even kind of more natural ways where people might meet each other and get opportunities are not functioning as well. And in particular, we heard from some of the folks in public housing that, I want to try and help people in the neighborhood to know it's safe to go out there and to know and know that those that don't live in the neighborhood to know that it's safe to come into our neighborhood, all right? This is an important point. Okay, so great, that's all consensed, but again, the questions become, what types of economic growth to serve which specific needs, and with what types, if any, controls are appropriate. And there's one diverging point of view, there are many, that one way to accomplish this economic growth would be a broad residential rezoning of the entire area from 4th Avenue to Bond in order to get the biggest bang for the buck. Again, a diverging viewpoint, one that we heard. Okay, we're getting close. Consensus on ground floor activity. This was easy. Everybody wants a vibrant street life. Nobody wants a 4th Avenue rezoning and the negative effects that people feel have come with that. However, we are complicated by the fact that in our climate reality, street level is a different level. We need to do a lot more elevation, which impacts what happens on ground floors. And there is not an easy or obvious solution right now about how you are resilient and at the proper elevations and able to have an active street life. Next. Physical character of the neighborhood. Everyone said, go with the theme. We like it. It's pretty good. It should fit into the history of our community and honor it. The building should reflect that where possible. Preserve the stuff that can be preserved. But again, the question is, what's really the most appropriate way to do that, considering all of the needs that there are? And again, just two opposing viewpoints, you know, strong articulation of a desire to preserve the ability to see the sky and to see human scale where communities can thrive. I think I like this quote so much I used it twice. And then, you know, look, higher buildings just need to feel like they've been here for a while. Design them well. It can happen. And finally, on the major point that we heard about process, people had a lot to say. And we, I think, have a lot to learn, although we're off to a splendid start tonight, which is that it must have broad-based engagement across different groups, difficult to engage groups. We need to make special efforts and do it right and do it well and do it on time and take that into account so that everybody can participate. Whatever comes out at the end should actually be reflective of real input. So it shouldn't just be a thing that whoever liked it at the beginning signs off on and, you know, we wrote it in our heads, but it actually is shaped by all these meetings that we're going to ask folks to participate in. No rubber stamping. And specifically, you know, that participation in the process, coming to a small group meeting, interview, or a larger meeting should not be misrepresented or misconstrued to be a full endorsement of the process or an enthusiastic statement about it. Simply, it is what it is, and everybody who shares their ideas and their passions and their visions and their fears are deeply valued in this, and it's our job to make sure that the product reflects it. So that is what we heard. You will have the opportunity to critique it. We took that and tried to put it into 7 smaller categories, which are these emerging shared values. They're emerging because we need to hear from you, and Paula's going to explain them. Thank you, Paula.
Thanks, Elena. Okay, next, Simon. So yes, as Elena mentioned, I'm going to quickly review these 7 categories of what we feel are these emerging sense of shared values, and they will form the basis of the rest of tonight's meeting, because then after I speak very briefly, we're going to turn it over to you guys so you can weigh in on these shared values, see what might be missing, what can be expounded upon, etc. So without further ado, the first one is there was a lot of consensus about the need to address the social, cultural, and environmental infrastructure of this neighborhood. And of course, infrastructure is a broad theme. It refers to the physical, environmental, and social foundations that make all neighborhoods vibrant and healthy and able to sustain themselves under current conditions and also conditions as they change into the future. So in order to achieve the subsequent 6 set of shared values and goals for the future of Gowanus, we need to address the shortcomings of the current infrastructure. In addition to the need for enhancing and expanding the social infrastructure of the public realm, so these are things like schools and parks and open space, we all know that Gowanus faces some serious and unique challenges related to its physical and environmental infrastructure. The combined effects of climate change and a canal that needs to be remediated mean that there are several key physical and environmental infrastructure needs, and they include things like climate and flood protections, sewage and flooding issues, combined sewer overflows and water quality, the need to be in sync with the Superfund cleanup process, and street and transit improvements. The next one relates to the mix of uses in the area. And so the current mix, many people feel, is desirable and should be maintained. We all know Gowanus is a multifaceted place, and there's a strong appreciation of its mix of urban land uses. Housing, art spaces, commercial and retail businesses, and manufacturing. And this mix really emerged as a strong value. So the neighborhood's compelling mix that exists of land uses is something positive that should be preserved into the future. And just a specific example that many people cited about preserving and enhancing the current mix is the importance of viable mixed-use buildings. So for example, putting active commercial or light industrial uses on the first floor with residential units above was seen as a potentially important tool for keeping and enhancing the neighborhood's mix of activities. Our third emerging shared value has to do with preserving and creating affordable housing. We all know that Gowanus has not been immune to the real estate dynamics that have been putting upward pressure on the cost of renting or buying a home in this neighborhood. And the resulting threat of this pressure is really affecting the neighborhood's socioeconomic diversity. And so this really emerged as a shared area of concern. So as such, there's a strong shared value about the need to preserve and create affordable housing. And this is really a value that's twofold. So we need to preserve the existing stock of affordable housing that already exists. And we also have to find opportunities to build new affordable housing. The fourth shared value relates to the need for more community amenities. This relates to the fact that the social and community infrastructure is so important to any neighborhood's public realm, including Gowanus. So there's broad consensus that the current level of amenities like school seats, public school seats, and publicly accessible open space is really insufficient for meeting the area's current level of need, not to mention what its future needs might be. So any future plans for Gowanus must proactively accommodate these needs for community amenities. The fifth shared value has to do with the canal as a publicly accessible open body of water. Despite its current state of contamination and disrepair, the Gowanus Canal itself emerged as a strong key shared value. People spoke of the magical feeling that its open waters convey, and of its potential to become a high-quality public amenity that can help meet the recreational and open space needs of people from all backgrounds. We heard several thoughts on how to potentially transform the canal into a high-quality public amenity. This includes creating a public park or esplanade along the canal's edge, and enhancing the visual corridors between the canal itself and the neighborhoods that surround it. Our sixth emerging shared value has to do with the notion that thriving local businesses should remain and expand. So again, we heard a lot of appreciation for the neighborhood's strong and growing base of small and medium-sized businesses. The value that people placed on the local business community echoes the shared value, of course, of the neighborhood's diversity of land uses. So people expressed strong support for both traditional and newer types of manufacturing, especially those manufacturing firms that meet emission standards, as well as working artists and artisans that are often cited as what makes this neighborhood a special and unique place. And this is our seventh emerging value, has to do with the fact that there are many iconic historic buildings that are assets in this neighborhood, and they should be preserved. There are several remarkable buildings that, regardless of what any future development or redevelopment plan looks like, should be kept. The neighborhood, as we all know, has had a long history of industry, and that history has produced some iconic buildings that are really meaningful to a lot of people, whether that's aesthetically, historically, or otherwise. So again, any future plan for the future of Gowanus should pay special importance to several of these iconic buildings and see that they're preserved. So now that's our 7 emerging values as we see them. We have posters on that back wall that, that display these values, and there are handouts at your tables so that you can revisit them and contemplate them and further review them. So I am going to now segue into what our first small group exercise that you'll be doing at your tables. So again, it's your chance to contemplate this set of shared values. You will review and discuss them in small groups. We hope to have enough facilitators and scribes. We are actually going to ask our facilitators and scribes to stand up, if you could, to identify yourselves. And there might be a little bit of a scramble as we try to accommodate this great turnout that we have. So if anyone needs to leave, we are just looking for extra chairs. So, so the facilitators and scribes will stand so that we can accommodate all this great participation.
Yeah, and also saying that if you don't have a table or a chair, people are going to be coming to you and gathering you in small group to create a table the best that we can. So everyone that wants to stay should stay. Yes, we do. So as we are... Yes. Okay, so we are pleased to be joined by Councilmember Stephen Levin. Hooray. Thank you so much for joining us and for co-sponsoring this process. And he has an announcement.